The margin of the photograph contained a scribbled note in my Nonna's familiar hand. He was my secret, my undoing, and the key to our silence. The accident was no mere twist of fate. It was planned a desperate act to shield us from ruin. The carefully chosen words sent shockwaves through me, each syllable a crack in the pedestal on which I had elevated my family's legacy. Please listen to the audio story with me. I arrived in Tuscany on a damp gray afternoon, the sky heavy with unshed tears, as if mourning with me. The narrow lanes of my childhood village, cobbled streets, edged by ancient stone walls and trailing ivy, invited me back into a past I had long idealized yet scarcely understood. My heart throbbed with both anticipation and sorrow. I was returning not only to the old town of my youth, but to the home where my beloved Nonna Elena had once ruled with a quiet, formidable strength. Even now, standing before the time-worn facade of her residence, her presence seemed to linger in the very bricks and whispers of wind that carried her unspoken confessions. Inside the house, memories wove through every shadow. Dust motes danced in slants of light that filtered through cracked windows, and I felt the weight of everything left unsaid. In a forgotten corner of the attic, behind a stack of faded linens and brittle photo albums, I discovered an old wooden box. Its surface was intricately carved with patterns that told stories of bygone craftsmanship, and the brass lock, though tarnished, exuded a quiet defiance against time. My trembling fingers eased the lid open, revealing a treasure trove of yellowed letters and a secret diary bound in worn leather. In that silent moment, amid the earthy scent of history and dust, I felt an overwhelming urgency to uncover the hidden narratives of my family's past. I settled into the corner of a small, deserted room, the diary spread out before me like a beckoning portal to secrets long buried. The first page, written in my Nonna's elegant yet hurried script, spoke of passions, regrets, and mysteries that had haunted her life. I read of a forbidden love, a love that blossomed in secret beneath the vast Tuscan skies and away from the critical eyes of tradition. The words trembled on the page, and with each carefully scribed sentence, my childhood image of a perfect matriarch began to fragment. My heart pounded with a growing disquiet as passages hinted at betrayal and guilt, suggesting that the seemingly benevolent Elena had once concealed a truth too potent to share. I could hardly believe that the woman I revered carried such burdens, yet here they were woven intricately into her private confessions. My hands shook as I turned to a loose page tucked between the diary's original leaves, a page that held a faded photograph. The image was sepia-toned, capturing a moment of hushed intensity. In it stood a man whose eyes burned with ardor, the very gaze of a forbidden lover. My breath caught the man in the photograph, bore an uncanny resemblance to the beloved grandfather I had only known through whispered family lore. For a heartbeat, confusion warred with disbelief. Had I always misremembered the tender recollections of family lore? The margin of the photograph contained a scribbled note in my Nonna's familiar hand. He was my secret, my undoing, and the key to our silence. The accident was no mere twist of fate. It was planned a desperate act to shield us from ruin. The carefully chosen words sent shockwaves through me, each syllable a crack in the pedestal on which I had elevated my family's legacy. As dusk settled over the ancient town and shadows deepened the mystery of the room, I pondered the implications of these revelations. The diary now pulsed with a darker rhythm, a chronicle not of redemptive love alone, but of calculated sacrifice and hidden transgressions. I felt a bitter thrill mixed with sorrow. A life that had seemed as if touched by gentle grace was in truth marred by decisions made in the name of honor and protection. I recalled my Nonna's stern, silent gaze in the few portraits I had seen of her, never betraying the depth of her secret torment. In that moment, the warm glow of admiration I had once felt turned to a cold, piercing uncertainty. Each word, each delicate ink stroke unraveled the illusion of a flawless lineage and left me questioning not only her past, but the very foundations of our family story. I closed the diary gently as the candle flickered in the gathering dark, the weight of the secret nearly too formidable to bear. My soul oscillated between a longing for the comforting embrace of an unblemished past and the harsh necessity of facing a reality riddled with imperfection and sorrow. The discovery of an illicit love, a surreptitious affair hidden behind layers of deception, and the explicit whisper that an accident had been no accident at all left me teetering on the brink of emotional collapse. With trembling resolve, I recognized that the sanctuary of my childhood was now a repository of painful truths, a repository that demanded exploration whether I was ready or not. As I prepared to leave the quiet room and step back into a world that suddenly seemed both intimately familiar and irrevocably strange, I knew that this journey into the heart of my family's secrets had just begun. Each word of the diary, every cryptic note and forgotten photograph beckoned me deeper into a maze of love, betrayal, and sacrifice, an intricate tapestry of moments bound together by a single haunting question. Does truth truly set us free, or does it chain us to the past? With the first whispers of night caressing the ancient walls, I stepped away, my mind swirling with revelations and a heavy premonition that nothing would ever be the same again. The days following my discovery were a descent into a labyrinth of lies and half-truths. I couldn't let the secrets spooled out from that dusty diary go unexplored. My inner turmoil compelled me to confront those I once trusted most, my mother and my uncle, and to seek guidance from the locals who had shared whispers of the past long before I ever set foot on these ancient streets. One chilly morning, with the early Tuscan sun barely warming the cobblestones, I found myself standing before my mother's modest, time-worn home. The heavy wooden door creaked as I entered, the air inside thick with unsaid words. "Mama," I began hesitantly, "there's so much I don't understand. I found Nonna's diary, and the secrets inside, they shake the very foundation of who I thought we were." Her eyes, once so gentle and reserved, immediately darkened with sorrow and apprehension. With trembling fingers, she reached for a worn armchair and motioned for me to sit. "I always feared facing the truth," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. "There are things in this family that are not meant to be remembered." Her words stung. I pressed on gently. "But how can they be meant to be forgotten when our very lives depend on understanding them? Nonna's secret, the accident. Why did you and Uncle Marco always avoid speaking about it?" For a long moment, the silence between us was broken only by the distant chime of a church bell. Finally, with tears gathering in her eyes, she said, "Some truths, my dear, are like old scars, too deep to reopen and yet impossible to entirely forget." Determined to peel back the layers of our family's carefully woven silence, I sought out my Uncle Marco later that same afternoon. I found him at the local enoteca, where the aroma of aged wine and hearty laughter masked the loneliness of old resentments. He was seated alone at a corner table, gazing at his glass with an intensity that belied his charming exterior. "Marco," I began, sliding into the seat opposite him, "I need to know the truth about Nonna Elena, about that accident and the forbidden love you always seem to resent." His eyes, dark and wary, flickered with a mix of indignation and regret before he spoke. "You're treading on dangerous ground, Isabella. Those secrets were buried for a reason. Sometimes unearthing the past only brings more pain than closure." "But isn't pain better than ignorance?" I countered, my voice steadier than I felt. "I need to understand why Nonna took such drastic measures, why she felt compelled to commit an act that ended in blood." Marco's silence was almost as loud as his words. Finally, he leaned forward, his voice low and bitter. "There was a time when love was something sacred, something we defended at all costs, even if it meant poisoning our own legacy." His admission hung in the air like a dense fog, leaving as many questions as it answered. Unable to extract the complete truth from my immediate family, I turned to Luca, my steadfast friend from the winery. I met him one twilight as the sky deepened into shades of violet, and the soft murmur of the countryside echoed around us. Over glasses of robust red wine, he shared bits of local lore that paralleled the scribbled confessions of the diary. I remember when the accident happened, Luca said quietly, there were whispers not of a tragic mishap, but a deliberate act. Nonna Elena was known to protect something precious, something that some believed was tied to a forbidden affair. The town never spoke openly, but everyone knew silence was expected. His eyes, steady and sincere, met mine. Sometimes the burden of secrets isn't just carried by those who hide them, but by everyone who dares to carry on their memory. Each conversation left fragments of a puzzle scattered between truth and myth. I began to piece together the narrative a young Elena ensnared in a perilous romance, a vow of silence taken to preserve family honor, and an accident so meticulously orchestrated that it altered the course of countless lives. Every whispered recollection, every avoiding glance from my mother and uncle only deepened the scars of betrayal I felt. I realized that the perfection I had once seen in our lineage was nothing more than an illusion, a carefully constructed facade maintained over generations by complicit silence and unbearable grief. One evening, as a storm brewed on the horizon, I sat alone in my grandmother's study, a room lined with portraits whose eyes seemed to judge every unspoken query. The wind howled outside as if echoing the voices of the past, and I felt the full force of my isolation. In the intimacy of that darkened room with only the flickering light of a candelabra kindling ancient shadows, I vowed to unearth every hidden truth, regardless of the cost. What was it that drove Nonna Elena to commit a sin that forever tainted her soul? Was it the desperate need to protect her forbidden love, or the crushing weight of an honor that demanded silence, even at the expense of innocence? The questions pounded inside me like relentless rains against a medieval stone wall. Yet amid this storm of revelations, I sensed a paradoxical liberation. With every unpaid debt of pain, with every secret that now threatened to shatter our fragile unity, I also discovered a strange empowerment. I was no longer the naive girl who idolized a flawless matriarch. I was a seeker of truth, a writer tasked with giving voice to the fractured legacy of my family. I realized the cost of hidden sins was high, and that the collective burden of our silence was too much to bear. Returning from the study, my resolve hardened. I could not allow the ghosts of the past to dictate the fate of the present. With a heavy heart, I recognized that embracing this painful history might pave the way not only for personal freedom, but for healing across generations. The journey had taken me deep into a realm of darkness and deception, and yet within that abyss glimmered a faint hope. The hope that acknowledging our deepest mistakes might be the first step toward a more honest future. And so amid the rustle of rain and the murmur of ancient secrets, I vowed to continue unearthing the truth, no matter where it might lead. My next steps would be fraught with heartache and peril, but I could no longer retreat into the comfortable shadows of an idealized past. The truth, in all its brutal splendor, demanded to be spoken, even if by my trembling hands. The night that followed the storm of revelations felt as if it were stitched from the very fabric of nightmares. I found myself unable to shake the disquiet that had accumulated over the past days, a disquiet born from half-whispered secrets and painful, elusive truths. Determined to confront the darkness head-on, I returned to my grandmother's study, the sacred enclave of whispered confessions and muted regret. There, amid the flickering candlelight, I resolved to piece together the final fragments of our fractured legacy. As I scanned the room, my eyes fell upon a small, inconspicuous envelope hidden behind an ancient portrait of Elena in her youth. Its paper, brittle from age, beckoned me to uncover yet another layer of our tangled past. My hands trembled as I opened it, revealing a letter penned in my grandmother's hurried, looping script. The words that tumbled from the page were unlike any I had seen before, a confession so raw and irrevocable that they threatened to shatter the delicate balance of memory I had clung to all these years. I read aloud in a voice that wavered with a mix of sorrow and disbelief. I did it. I took a life, the only choice I had, to guard our family's honor. The stark confession spelled out the unthinkable, the mysterious accident that the family had long accepted as a tragic twist of fate was in truth a calculated act. Nonna Elena had shot down a man she once loved, not out of malice alone, but to silence a threat to the very fragile legacy that they all cherished. The revelation struck me like a bolt of lightning. Everything I had believed, the tales of a forbidden love, the hushed tones around the accident, it all converged into one harrowing truth. The man in the old photograph was not my grandpa, as I had once hoped, but a harbinger of a secret too dangerous to live. Each carved comma and carefully pressed syllable deepened the fissure in my heart. Reeling from the profound betrayal of the past, I knew I had to face those who had tried to shield me from this reality. That very evening, I gathered my courage and sought out both my mother and my uncle for one final confrontation. In the cramped, dimly lit living room of my mother's home, the heavy aroma of old wood and melancholy silence filled the space. My mother's eyes, usually so calm and collected, now shimmered with unshed tears as she met my gaze. Uncle Marco, his face etched with lines of regret and hardened resolve, sat stiffly beside her. The atmosphere was stifling, as if the weight of all our unspoken words pressed down on us like a relentless force. Why, I demanded softly at first, then louder as the pent-up emotion overtook me. Why did you both allow this secret to fester? Did you truly believe that burying the truth could ever mend the pain of our past? My voice cracked under the pressure of emotion. My mother's face contorted in anguish, and tears slid silently down her cheeks. "Isabella," she whispered, struggling to regain control, "some sins are too monstrous to unearth fully. I thought that by keeping it hidden, I could protect you, protect us all." But her words felt hollow against the raw admission of my discovery. Uncle Marco interjected, his tone tight with bitterness. "We did what we thought best. Nonna's actions, they were born out of a time when honor was everything. Revealing the truth would have unleashed chaos, tearing our family apart beyond repair." The sound of his voice, laced with both pain and justification, reverberated in the room. I pressed on, unable to accept evasions any longer. "But at what cost? Your silence has condemned us to live with this unbearable legacy. I deserve to know the truth, even if it means facing the darkness head-on." A long, agonizing pause followed. My mother's trembling hands clutched the fabric of her dress as she recounted whispered anecdotes from her own youth, a time when our family's honor had been both a blessing and a curse. "Elena loved fiercely," she said, voice quivering, "but that love came with sacrifices so dire that the choice was clear: preserve everything we had, even if it meant drowning in guilt." At that moment, the layers of indignation and sorrow clashed within me. My heart felt viciously torn between empathy and the burning need for clarity. I recalled the tender notes in the diary, the stolen glances in old photographs, and the silent suffering etched into every word of that final letter. Each piece was a cry from the past, an anguished witness to a time when love and honor danced a perilously thin line between salvation and ruin. The truth, as harsh and unforgiving as it was, stood resolute before me. A piercing silence swallowed our conversation. I looked from my mother's tear-stained face to Uncle Marco's somber eyes, searching for any flicker of understanding in a sea of regret. I knew then that exposing this dark secret to the outside world would only unleash further devastation, fracturing our fragile bonds beyond repair. The magnitude of Nonna Elena's desperate act loomed large, a spectral reminder that some sins once committed in the name of honor live on as an eternal scar upon the soul of a family. With a heavy heart and a resolve tempered in sorrow, I made the decision to keep this secret locked away, just as it had been across generations. The truth, though I had unearthed it in all its brutal splendor, was a burden too immense for the world to bear. I whispered apologies to the empty room, promising myself that I would carry this painful legacy not as a chain, but as a lesson in the high cost of silence and the ambiguous nature of forgiveness. In that charged moment, I realized that our family story was not one of simple heroes or villains. It was a tapestry, woven with threads of triumph and tragedy, love and betrayal, a mosaic of human choices that defied easy judgment. As the night deepened, I embraced the bitterness of truth, mixed with a longing for redemption. I knew my path forward would be fraught with inner turmoil, but it would be guided by the fierce clarity of understanding that only truth, no matter how painful, could bring. That night, as the echoes of our confrontation faded into the dark corridors of memory, I resolved to write our story with unwavering honesty. The family secret was mine to carry a sorrowful, enduring flame that would remind me that sometimes the scars we inherit are also the scars that free us. The chill of early dawn found me once again alone on the narrow stone steps of our family villa, where centuries of secrets and whispered regrets lay heavy in the silent air. I stood there wrapped in the tendrils of mist that clung to the ancient oak trees surrounding the courtyard, grappling with the legacy of Nonna Elena, a legacy marred by betrayal, honor, and an unforgivable deed. The candlelight of yesterday's confession still burned in my memory, and I understood with a painful clarity that I had reached the precipice of my journey. In that stillness, I acknowledged the irreversible truth I had uncovered. Every piece of my shattered childhood, the carefully hidden diary, the trembling admissions of my mother and Uncle Marco, and those furtive glances filled with unspoken sorrow, had led me to this singular crushing revelation: Nonna Elena had taken a life, and in doing so had sealed our fate with a destructive secret. It was an act born of a desperate desire to preserve a brittle sense of honor, an act that demanded my silence in return. I could feel the weight of generations bearing down upon me, a burden interwoven with both agony and, paradoxically, a strange sense of relief. In that moment, I understood that the truth was not a weapon to be wielded recklessly, but a labyrinth meant to be navigated with profound caution. I spent the hours that followed in a restless haze, pacing through the dim corridors of the villa, as if each creaking step might echo the voices of my ancestors. I found myself in front of a portrait of Elena, her eyes captured in oil and memory, radiated both fierce love and torment. "I forgive you, Nonna," I murmured quietly, not as an absolution, but as an acceptance of the tragic choices that had defined our past. The act of forgiveness was not about exonerating her misdeeds. Rather, it was a reconciliation with the irreparable parts of our shared history. Yet forgiving could not reverse the cold finality of that fateful night, and the sorrow that clung to my soul was as undeniable as the Italian sun rising over the Tuscan hills. I wrestled with an agonizing dilemma: should I expose the truth and shatter the fragile bonds that held our family together, or should I bury it deep within the vaults of our shared memories to protect those I loved? The answer arrived on a crisp afternoon as I wandered through the town's aged alleys where every stone echoed with the sighs of forgotten generations. I realized that the world was not ready to absorb the full weight of our tragedy, that the revelation of this secret would only kindle a firestorm of anguish that would ultimately devastate the remnants of our once proud lineage. My decision crystallized as I stood before the weathered gravestone of Nonna Elena, isolated in a small cemetery tucked away in the shadow of a hill. There, the earth seemed to guard its secrets as fiercely as our family had for so many decades. I placed my trembling hand on the cold marble, my heart a tumult of sorrow and resolve. "I will keep your secret with me, Nonna," I vowed softly. "I will bear the unyielding burden of this truth so that our family might find a way to heal without being torn apart by the past." The words were not a declaration of silence and fear, but a commitment to protect the fragile present from the corrosive power of revelation. That evening, in the privacy of the villa's attic, I retrieved the old wooden box once more, a box that had first introduced me to the labyrinth of our family's hidden sins. With deliberate care, I placed the diary, the letters, and the final damning confession inside. I locked them away not out of cowardice, but with an understanding that some truths are too heavy to cast upon the world without dire consequence. The box now sealed would remain a relic of a painful history, one to be revisited only when and if the day came when our hearts were brave enough to face its contents without being overwhelmed by despair. In the deep solitude of that night, as the soft sigh of the wind mingled with the sound of distant church bells, I felt both liberated and imprisoned by the secret I carried. I had forgone the catharsis of public truth in favor of preserving the delicate unity of our fractured family. The duality of my choice was stark. Forgiveness did not erase the horror of Nonna Elena's deeds, nor did acceptance nullify the scars they left behind. Instead, it marked the beginning of a lifelong journey where every step forward was haunted by a sorrow that could never be fully absolved. I emerged from that nocturnal vigil with a heart that bore the silent smile of tragic acceptance. I resolved that instead of letting this secret fester and wane in bitterness, I would transform it into a narrative of resilience, a testament to the complex interplay of love, honor, and unforgiving fate. My pen would become my instrument of quiet rebellion, a means to capture our story in its rawest form, so that future generations might learn that even in the darkest chapters, the human spirit can find a way to persevere. As I walked away from the villa that night, the soft glow of the moon lighting my path along the ancient stone streets, I knew the secret would remain with me, a silent, sorrowful flame that both warmed and wounded. I had chosen not to expose the truth to a world unready for it, but to honor the past with its inherent flaws. In doing so, I carried not only the burden of what had been done in the name of honor, but also the hope that by embracing our imperfections, we might someday forge a future where love can thrive beyond the constraints of unspoken regret. And so with each step into an uncertain but illuminated future, I promised myself that while the scars of our history might never fully fade, I would honor them by living with truth in all its harsh, imperfect beauty.